78, specifically to bring together brand new prosecutor-based victim advocacy programs across the state of Ohio. Since then, we've really grown. We now have nearly 600 members across the state of Ohio. Our members are in prosecutors' offices, law enforcement, hospitals, child advocacy centers, domestic violence networks, rape crisis centers, a little bit of everything. We provide training, technical assistance, legislative leadership, as well as develop best practice guides. So really, we are here to support advocates in the work that they do every day.
Thank you so much, Elise. Kathy, I have you next on my screen. So if you could please introduce yourself and once again, talk about your agency and how long you've been in your role.
Great. Thank you. And a perfect time as well. As I mentioned before, I'm in DC with National Victims' Rights Week. So in a hotel, if some drilling happens, for some reason they're doing some construction in the hotel. So I apologize for the noise. Again, I want to also say, Rosa, thank you so much for bringing us all together for this very important conversation. My name is Kathy Harper Lee. I'm the founder and executive director of Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center. I started the organization in 2000. As a survivor of sexual violence, I learned firsthand that although victims if any type of free legal assistance when their rights were violated. So as a result of that, founded the organization in 2000, been in this role now for a little over 24 years. What we do primarily is provide, again, free legal representation to crime victims throughout the criminal justice process to ensure that their rights, the rights that they choose to exercise, are protected and enforced. The types of survivors we serve all victims of all types of crime. We see the greatest source of violations, though, are involve the child and adult sexual violence victims, domestic violence victims, co-survivors of homicide victims, assault, are some of the predominantly, we see those types of cases are violated the most. Now, you don't want me to answer all the questions just yet, right? Just this.
No, not yet. I'll be asking them one by one. Doug, thank you for joining us today. If you could please introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your agency as well as the time that you have been in your role.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you all for including CASA in this important discussion this morning. My name is Doug Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of Ohio CASA GAL Association. We are the state support office for the 47 local CASA programs throughout Ohio. I have been in this position for 12 years, but I've been affiliated with CASA since 1993, and I've been in the child abuse business, the court business, for 42 years. This is a critical time in this business, and I appreciate everybody listening and supporting us as we try and resolve this problem. At the peak of the VOCA money, CASA was getting a significant amount of money. If this happens, we will not be able to continue functioning the way we have. CASA is in 47 programs, and we work with the juvenile courts to help the judges make decisions on what to do in the best interest of the child. So I appreciate all of your interest in trying to plug this hole and look forward to the discussion this morning.
Thank you so much, Doug. Gwen, thank you for joining us. If you don't mind introducing yourself as well as the agency that you represent and how long you've been with the agency and what does the agency actually do?
Sure. I'm Gwen Howe-Gapers. I am chair of the Victim Witness Committee for the Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys Association. I also serve on the executive and legislative committee of the OPAA and am currently treasurer of OPAA. I'm the elected Henry County prosecutor, and in Henry County, we use our advocacy center that has victim assistance individuals, and there are 2 currently. I could not do what I do without them. because my office is very small. I am the only one that does the criminal cases. And so I rely on them heavily to assist me in getting victims where they need to be, hearing them, helping them, and all of that. And I could not do that without them. And so this is very important because they're an agency that serves 3 different counties, not just where I'm at. And they rely very heavily on the VOCA grants. I've been in prosecution. Next month, it'll be 36 years. So we started where victim advocacy was not in line, and we didn't have them, and I don't know what we did without them. So thank you for inviting.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Danielle.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. My name is Danielle Vandergriff, she, her pronouns. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Ohio Network of Children's Advocacy Centers, also known as ONCAC. I have been in this current role for about 2 years now. Our agency is the statewide networking organization. We represent about 37 children's advocacy centers throughout the state, serving approximately 11,000 children victims a year. CACs are a coordinated response to investigation and service delivery. So we partner in our local communities with law enforcement, child protective services, medical providers, mental health providers, victim advocacy, and the prosecutor's office. We have experienced VOCA cuts before, as you all have, and we do not believe that a next round of VOCA cuts will be sustainable for many of our programs, as the majority of their budgets are funded through VOCA. So we are excited to be here today and tell the story and be a part of all of this advocacy efforts, and hopes that we can continue to serve all of the communities that we serve together. So thanks for hosting today, Rosa.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the opportunity to shine some light on CACs and all of the other programs around the state, right? We strongly believe that there is power and strength in our collective, and that if we come together as a community of practice, we can actually go ahead and elevate the needs of each and every one of our member-based agencies, but above all, survivors, right? In need of all of our services. Mary, our sibling coalition at ODVN, if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about how long you've been in your role and what does ODVN actually do?
Thank you, Rosa. Thanks for including ODVN. I am Executive Director of the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. I've been in this position for 5 years. I've been in the domestic violence advocacy field for more than 20 years. ODVN is a coalition of Ohio's 76 domestic violence programs. That includes 58 residential shelters and 16 non-residential programs, including 8 culturally specific programs. ODVN advocates before federal and state elected officials on behalf of those programs. We also provide technical assistance and training. All of our programs, almost all of our programs, if you are served by an advocate at one of our programs, they've received training from staff at ODVN. We're very concerned about this next round of VOCA cuts. Like my colleagues before me, I too am not sure if our programs, especially some of our smaller programs, will be able to survive them. Thank you so much for including me, Rosa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I know we have a slew of questions, and I believe that I told you all that I hope that we could just have a candid conversation, right? But a lot of our audience is not necessarily our member-based agencies. So Elise, I am going to throw you a curveball that I didn't ask on the question, and that is, how do you define VOCA? What is VOCA for the general public? Victims of Crime Act. What actually is it? Why was it established? And why is this so crucial and critical for our state?
Sure, happy to talk about that. So VOCA stands for the Victims of Crime Act, and it was implemented in 1984 under the Reagan administration. It set up basically there was a fund that was created, the Crime Victims Fund, or CVF, that was started as part of the bill. And it is funded primarily through, not from taxpayer dollars, it's funded primarily through court settlements, fees, penalties, and things of that nature, paid at the federal level. It's then distributed through grants to states, to all 50 states, I believe, and it funds a lot of different programs. It funds the VINE notification, the Victim Information Notification Every Day. It also funds some other things like the processing of sexual assault and rape kits. And then it also funds crime victim services, which is what we're all here to talk about today.
Thank you so much for that
Do
overview.
you want me to give you a little? I can also give a brief history of the decreases as well, if you don't mind.
Definitely, that
Yeah,
would be
so
great. But before that, at least for those of that are joining and showing, nationally, these funds actually support services for over 6 million victims of all type of crimes annually, right? And that is approximately 6,462 direct service organizations. And in Ohio, these funds actually support over 350 agencies, and that is current because we had over 500 agencies when we were in the peak of VOCA funding for our state. So Elise, if you could tell us a little bit more about the awards or the cuts in particular and how that actually has been affecting us as a whole.
Yeah, so starting in about 2017 or 2018, around that time, the federal government started to settle a lot of these court cases out of court, which was really great for the government. They were able to take those fees and fines and bring them into the general treasury. Unfortunately, that meant that these funds were not going to the Crime Victims Fund. So over time, that fund was depleted. From 2018, we've already suffered 60% cuts from the distribution from that fund. That is absolutely massive. The additional cuts that we expect for 2025 will be an additional 43%, bringing the total to about 76% cuts from 2018, which, as you can imagine, is not sustainable.
Yes, not at all. Thank you. And, some might ask, okay, not everybody here is represented. And no, even though there is power and strength in our collective, there are many other coalitions, there's many other types of other victimizations and crimes that are not in this space, but that we do want to elevate, and that is forensic nurses as well, as also our partners in homicide, right? And drunk driving, once again, victims of crime, any victims of crime, human trafficking collaborative as well, and many others. So once again, the impact is great for our state. And with that, Kathy, tell us a little bit about what impact would the actual cuts have, not only on Marcy's laws and the program, but all of the programs that you would actually represent. And that question would go across the board for all of us. So what does the impact of the cuts that currently would be, for those of you that don't know, we receive in the past $42 million this year, right? In the appropriation or the funding, Ohio is receiving only a total of $26,888,000, right? So that is once again a 43.2.5% cut. That would be very unsustainable. But Kathy and others, what does this actual cut impact and mean for you, for the members that you actually represent?
obviously, I think we had to reduce our staffing, which meant that we then reduced our outreach and education. And that's another component of the services that we provide. We provide victims' rights training for law enforcement, prosecutors, courts, other allied professionals, SANE nurses, so that everyone knows along the way what victims' rights are at every point. We do that to help reduce the number of victims' rights violations, but nonetheless, we still have thousands of victims contact us every year. Well, due to the previous cuts, we were only able to serve a little over 1,300 crime victims last year. And we had to turn away 189 crime victims whose rights were being violated, and they turned to us for assistance and help. And there was no place to refer them to. With additional cuts this year, it means, again, reduced staffing, and there will be hundreds more crime victims that we're going to have to turn away. And we're going to also be looking and be mindful of our time training of all the changes regarding Marcy's Law and requirements. We provide training. The OPAA invites us to their annual conference. We provide training to judges. We have a meeting next week, just Monday, with the Association of Chiefs of Police for their conference on the implementation and the guidance regarding Marcy's Law and the Victims' Rights Request Form. These things are so critical to crime victims, but we're going to have to cut back on our training even more so. So it's a pretty dire situation.
Thank you, Kathy. Doug, what would it mean for your agency in particular, but also for the members that you represent under CASA, the implications of these cuts again?
Well, we serve about 10,000 children a year. There are 16,000 in care. So we're starting at a deficit already. About 3,000 of those are in the large metro cities. And I think they will probably be able to absorb this cut to a certain extent. But that means about 7,000 of our kids are served by the smaller counties. And by design, our programs only have 1, 2, maybe 3 staff people. And about 50% of that is VOCA funded. So if you take away a significant amount of their VOCA funding, they're going to lose staff. The staff is what supervises our 2,500 volunteers, and the $2,500 volunteers is what serves the children. So in some of the smaller counties, they're just going to have to shut down. They won't be able to have a staff person. We will not operate volunteers without staff supervision and training. And so those children will not be served. So it could be devastating in some of the smaller counties, Appalachian, Ohio, but it will also impact the middle size, because they will have to cut back on the number of children they serve based on the number of staff that they can have available to supervise their volunteers.
Thank you. Yes. Gwen, for the Prosecutor Association, what does it actually mean, as well as for your particular counties as well?
Thank you. So a number of our members have advocates through their prosecutors' offices. So those offices will not be able to continue to support having those individuals within their office. They'd have to ask for support somehow through the commissioners, which again, that's probably not going to happen. So then they'll have to cut back, and then individuals could lose their jobs or only going part-time. As for my county, they're holding on as a shoestring. They have 2 people, but it's difficult we've had a lot of turnover, and it's difficult to retain individuals given that they're unsure because it's grant money, the pay that is given, and the amount of time and energy that we request of these individuals. So it will certainly affect our ability to follow Marcy's Law. I mean, we have a requirement with the police department, the sheriff's department. We try and come through with that. But again, notifying all the victims is required, providing the support, providing the support to the SART clinic, taking them there, that will suffer if they lose this significant amount of money.
Thank you. Danielle, what does it mean for your agency in particular, as well as for the over 35 child advocacy centers that you represent around the state?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, for our agency in particular, it means similar things to what it means for all of you. It means less technical assistance, less trainings. Obviously, as practices change, we need to be sure that we're training our members on what is the best practice now that we have more knowledge on how to intervene in these traumatic cases of that these children are facing. And so, if we can't offer that training, obviously our centers will suffer, and then ultimately the victims will suffer. So for our agency, in particular at the statewide level, that's the biggest concern right now is how do we maintain staffing levels so that we can provide the technical assistance to the local communities so that they can serve the victims. What it means for our centers, we have some centers, like Doug was saying, that will likely close if we cannot find another funding stream or get this fixed. No business, no service delivery center can take a 70 to 100% budget cut. That's just not sustainable. We have centers in rural Ohio that have only one staff member. With that one staff member, if you lose 70% of your budget, you lose their entire salary. So we have pretty dire concerns on what that's going to mean from a service delivery area. We are certain that there is more need in Ohio than the children that we are seeing currently. So while we are trying to build capacity, like I said last year, we only saw about 11,000 children. We know that there are more children victims than that. We need to be building capacity, not losing capacity. The other thing that we've seen centers have to do in the past when they've experienced cuts is there's a cutoff for age. So right now our centers will see ages 0 to 18. We're children advocacy centers. We have some centers that then can only see kids 0 to 12, or some centers who will only be able to see children who have experienced sexual abuse and not the physical abuse, and certainly not the neglect cases. So it makes our centers start to make decisions on which victims get services. And as we all know here and the larger collective knows, that's simply not a way to run a society. And it's unacceptable to offer services based on what we deem is triageable. That's just not a sustainable method. And so, again, we're just so happy to be here today and happy to have this conversation. And hopefully we don't have to keep doing this year after year, and everyone will start to have a deeper understanding of how integral all of our services are to making strong communities in a stronger Ohio. So thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Mary, for DV and interpersonal violence, your program in particular, as well as all of the 70 plus agencies that you represent, what does this actually mean?
Well, for ODVN itself, we use a lot of the VOCA grant that our agency receives for victim assistance. We use it to provide relocation services, to pay to help survivors who are moving from shelters into apartments or into a new home. We use it also. It's an important funding source of our legal assistance program, which helps survivors who aren't able to get legal assistance from the legal aids. We served more than 200 survivors last year through our legal program, so I'm concerned about the impact of this VOCA cut on that, especially. For our programs, though, the situation is more dire. Last year, our program sheltered or provided transitional housing to nearly 10,000 survivors and children, and that's great, but we turned more than 8,000 survivors away. So last year, without these funding cuts, we're already turning away 45% of the people who need our services. So obviously, this next round of VOCA cuts is going to have a pretty bad impact. We're going to be turning more people away. We provided supportive services, non-residential services, to about 98,000 survivors and their kids. And about a third of our programs reported that they had to turn people away from supportive services because they didn't have the capacity to serve them. Obviously, that's before the VOCA cuts. So we're very concerned that the unmet need that we're already quantifying and dealing with is just going to get a lot worse.
Yes. Elise, and closing this question with you as an agency, right, as well as all of the Ohio Witness advocates that you all represent that are not necessarily community-based advocates, but that is so dire. Can you tell us about what this impact would actually mean to your agency as well as all of those you represent around the state?
Yeah, thank you so much. So currently our funding is about 46% VOCA funds. We've definitely had to diversify since all of the cuts started. Luckily, as a nonprofit organization, we have the opportunity to do that. The problem is a lot of our member organizations don't have that as a possibility. Especially governmental agencies, although they may be eligible for some foundation funds, many foundations only grant to nonprofit agencies. And they may not be able to go after some of the grants that a lot of organizations, especially nonprofits, rely on, like VOCA funding. At the same time, they still have a legal obligation to provide very essential services under Marcy's Law, which I know we've thrown around that term a few times. Marcy's Law is basically a law that expands and really enforces victims' rights in Ohio. And many prosecutor-based offices, victim services organizations, as well as law enforcement have certain legal mandates under Marcy's Law to provide certain rights and certain services to victims of crime. So many programs are already down to one singular advocate in their offices in a prosecutor program. Honestly, I don't know how they're going to continue to provide services with additional cuts. It's going to be incredibly difficult to maintain any services at all. One thing I did want to point out is that many programs are already working in prosecutor-based programs. Many programs are already working with survivors for 4 to 8 months. Some of them, depending on the crime type, work with a survivor for years. They're not just providing notification, they're not just making sure that the person is able to speak with the prosecutor and have their wishes known. They're not just going with them to interviews with law enforcement, but they're also just providing holistic advocacy, safety planning, ensuring that the person financially is able to recover from the crime, emotionally recover from the crime, and physically get the care that they need as well. So it's really a holistic a role, and I don't know how they're going to do it with additional cuts.
Thank you so much. And putting in context, right, for those of that are joining us, the funding reduction from the year 2023 to the year 2024 actually, again, represents a 43% cut to Ohio VOCA award. That overall would be a 77% reduction in VOCA funding from 2018 towards 2024, which is massive. And that would be crisis hotline, counseling therapy for survivors, transportation and emergency funds for survivors, court-appointed special advocates for children, accessibility for persons with disability, protection order assistance, accompaniment to law enforcement interviews, prosecution meetings, pretrial conferences, trial, sentencing, parole board hearings, coordinating or offering interpreting services, support for child forensic interviews, accompaniment and advocacy during post-sexual violence forensic medical examination, and evidence collection, emergency deployment to critical incident scenes of mass victimization, among some of those, right? So when we're talking about these VOCA funding, what does it actually mean for us and how it impacts in the collective? VOCA funding supports direct services to survivors. And for us in sexual violence, it's the 24-hour medical advocacy, the legal advocacy, the crisis response and ongoing counselings or therapy for those that are not CARF, right, or under the insurance for Medicaid or over the 10, in recognizing that there shouldn't be an expiration date, that some victimization is not acute, right, but it actually continues to perpetrate, especially if we're talking about providing services with a trauma-informed lens. The significant cuts mean fewer advocates and therapists available to provide support, information, options in aftermath of sexual violence. And for us at the statewide coalition, it is cutting our CAP services that we provide to over 12 counties that don't have a local rape crisis center within a 30-mile radius, as well as the reduction with our panel attorneys, which we actually offer that, as well as all of the training and technical assistance from the coalition level. So it's actually understanding that there is a very, very high impact of these cuts to not only our agencies, but our member-based agencies. And that, in large, is to all survivors of violence within our state and what it actually would mean. Layoff after COVID is it would be dire. And some of you actually talked about fundraising, right? We're actually also responsible for what is called match or fundraising. Tell me a little bit about, is it doable to fundraise, right? People put it so simple, like, oh yes, you could go ahead and do a fundraising. Is it sustainable? Is it doable to go ahead and do some fundraising, Kathy? Tell us a little bit about that. And do you think that it is as doable with the constraints that we actually have for funding to supplement these VOCA cuts?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Rosa. Yeah. It's always, obviously, well, why don't you just do an event, do fundraising? You know, people don't seem to understand all of the time, effort, commitment that goes into that. And there are a number of things that you need to consider. You can't do fundraising on VOCA or any kind of federal grant time, right? So you need to have volunteers. You need to, organizing volunteers, corralling volunteers, people who have the knowledge to put together these large events is something that's not easy to do. It's almost a full-time job in itself to organize volunteers to run an event. And, unless you are just, you hit a home run and get the most, fantastic fundraiser out there. A lot of these events, when you look at the bottom dollar, what it costs to organize the event, to put it together, and then what the actual return is, oftentimes there's not even that great of a return. It's, we do them to create more awareness, and that help and to engage corporate community, and also then hopefully then from the corporations to provide some additional support. But it's just a lot of time and effort, and it's a great thing to do as long as you have the capacity and as long as you have the staffing to be able to make that one sector of a priority of the organization. But yes, it's not easy.
Thank you. Danielle, do you want to add anything to the ability of fundraising and supplementing some of the loss of VOCA?
Yeah, the fundraising, I'm with you on that, Kathy. It's one of those things. Fundraising in itself is a full-time job, and oh, by the way, can't be funded by any of the means that we already have funds for. So you have to find someone who's willing to be a fundraiser for free, and then maybe fund some of their own salary, and then on top of that, provide funds back to the organization. And I kind of laugh a little bit about it because it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, if you don't have funds to hire a fundraiser, you can't raise funds. And we right now we don't have enough funds to provide technical assistance so that we can serve victims. So fundraising is the last thing on our radar. It's a merry-go-round that I am ready to see some strong legislative leadership get us all off of so that we can serve the victims.
Mary, do you want to expand a little bit on fundraising efforts and how it is at times not sustainable, especially from a macro level, right? When we don't want to also interfere or intervene with the funding that is coming through the local agencies within those communities.
Right, and Danielle really explained it well, the dilemma that our member programs face, because they have to have private dollars that they can use to do the fundraising, and they don't have those private dollars anyway. And if they did, they'd probably want to use them to provide victim services. I think that this is an especially acute issue for our member programs in smaller and more rural counties. I think that there are, especially those counties that don't have much of a corporate base or employment base. They don't have companies there that are able to provide much support. So I know that our programs, all of them do fundraisers in their communities, but I think realistically, there's just a limit to what they can hope to raise. Now, that's not the case in the state's large urban areas, but honestly, I think these VOCA cuts are going to have the biggest impact in our smaller, more rural communities.
Definitely.
Rosa,
Yes, Doug.
if I may add another twist to the fundraising debate, a third of our programs are court-based. Judicial canons say they can't raise funds. Not coincidentally, most of them are the smaller Appalachian counties. So VOCA is their only. They can get federal grants, especially if we take it through us, but because they're court-based, they cannot raise private funds. So they are providing a service only through this funding, and there are no other alternatives.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. And I think that we all agree, right, that these cuts would actually mean less services, and it would mean layoff of staff and closing of programs that are also reliant on 100% or even 70, 60, 40%. The amount that they receive from VOCA might just be the sustainability of that one staffer for the entire community. Have you had the opportunity of serving or sending surveys to know exactly what is the operational percentage that some of your member-based agencies or yourself have allocated specifically to VOCA?
To that question, but I do think it's fair to say that for most of the programs that are not in urban areas, their VOCA grants are their dominant funding source. So they're going to, best case scenario, they're going to lay people off. I mean, that's the best case scenario. Worst case is programs close.
You know, and if I could add a little bit, and it's a little bit off your question as well, but as Prosecutor Hal Gerbers had mentioned earlier, these cuts are really impacting prosecutors, law enforcement, you know, on their responsibilities to notify crime victims. And as Danielle said, that right now, especially is a time where we need to be building capacity instead of reducing capacity. Because one important thing I want to note that's coming up that has related to Marcy's Law and House Bill 343 that we were able to pass last year, which provides guidance on how to properly implement Marcy's Law. One of the major pieces of that are ensuring that crime victims are aware of their rights, making sure that they understand many of these rights should be automatic. And I say should be because they're not always, right? So they know which ones should be automatic. But some of their most critical rights, they have to request, right? If they don't request them, then it's a domino effect. So they are supposed to request the right to be, you know, notified of proceedings. But if they don't request to be notified of proceedings, then, and if they are not notified, then the next violation occurs because they have an automatic right to be present, right, and to be heard by the court on matters that impact their rights, such as arraignment, you know, plea, change of disposition, sentencing, and many opportunities that they have the right to address the court. So with 343 that passed last April, the implementation piece is that law enforcement is now required at the point of contact to provide a victim's rights request form to crime victims. It's a simple 2-pager. It replaces the Victims' Rights Handbook, which is basically a 45-page booklet that's kind of hard, but this just is a 2-page document that provides the most critical rights at the time, things that impact their safety, their privacy, and allow them to have meaningful participation within the criminal justice process. Law enforcement has been having a difficult time understanding what their responsibilities are since this past last April. There was a modification in June. So we've been working with law enforcement. So I guess to say that the form is not getting out there. Many jurisdictions are doing it. Some jurisdictions are not. But the reality is, this is what our meeting with the OACP is about on Monday. So within the next few months, we hope to be working with the OACP, the BSSA, and others to ensure that this victims' rights form is getting in the hands of crime victims and that they are aware of the rights. Now, what's going to happen then? Over the next few months, it's going to begin to be implemented throughout the state. Every crime victim will be aware of their rights from that time of first point of contact with law enforcement. And that's going to cause a tremendous, tremendous increase, I think, to all of our organizations, because if they see rights that they are not, their rights are not being violated, right? They're not allowed certain opportunities. They're going to be calling local. They're going to be calling rape crisis centers, the DV shelters, whoever they're working with, the prosecutors. They're going to be calling us, looking for free legal assistance to help protect and enforce their rights. So when this 343 first went into effect last April, one day of press brought a 450% increase call volume into our organization of victims requesting free legal assistance. That was one day of media attention regarding the passage of 343. So we can't even begin to imagine, once every crime victim has a victims' rights request form in their hand and they can easily see in a bullet point what their rights are, which rights should be automatic, which rights they have to request, it's going to be a far greater increase than 450%. And what do we have? About 780,000 crime victims every year in Ohio, approximately. All of our organizations are going to see a tremendous increase, I think, from crime victims wanting assistance and helping them to protect and exercise their rights.
Thank you. Yes, and not having, right, the staff available or even to actually answer the calls. The other aspect is that we've noticed that we constantly have to define what VOCA is to our legislators, right? And this concept that the VOCA fix and what was that, and having to break that down. What do you want legislators to actually know in reference to this impact, to the importance that it is that they all step in, and also recognizing, right, like during ARPA funding as well as COVID funding, there was an influx of money coming into our states, to our programs, that we probably did not feel as much the VOCA cuts, because those fundings were there. But those are coming to an end also this year. So what do we want legislators to know in reference to the impact? And while the VOCA fix at the federal level might have been great, it is still not populating down in the levels that we actually need, right, to go ahead and suffice the cuts, especially in Ohio, that has been feeling it so heavily, because we first had in 2018 over $117 million, right? And that was the opportunity, dream, expand, build capacity, and do more services. Then we saw all of the cuts. So what do you want our legislators to know? Danielle, you want me? I'll start with you.
Thanks, Rosa. So I think from my point of view, the most important thing for legislators to know, they're going to prioritize, they have money for what they care about. And that's the truth. And so, what I want them to know is that we are the ones on the ground, our organizations are the ones on the ground serving these victims and changing the trajectory of people's lives and making Ohio a stronger state. And there is nothing more that they should be prioritizing. It's that simple. It's that simple. And so, for me, if they don't know what VOCA stands for, or don't, okay, but you know that victims need served and you know that this is broken and we can tell you how to fix it. We can tell you what legislation to vote for. You just have to make it a priority. And when you make it a priority and we raise these victims and we have the capacity to provide the support for survivors, we change our state and we continue to lead. And that's where everyone should be focused. That's what I want them to know, is to really connect the dots, that if you're not investing in these services, the entire state suffers.
Thank you, Danielle. Doug, what do you want the local representatives to know?
The legislators need to understand that victims aren't some special part of the population. Victims are their neighbors, their family, the people down the street, and the people that vote for them. And so providing victim services is part of their duty. VOCA actually saved them money and created services that victims deserved and needed. Now it's time for the legislators to understand that you can't just allow that to stop. And although we will all continue to be creative in how we fund these services, it is a duty of the government and therefore of the legislators to provide services to the people they serve. They can't pigeonhole victims into some unknown population. They are the people that they serve, and it is their duty to help us provide those services.
Thank you. Mary, what do you want legislators to know?
I really want to piggyback on what Doug said. He is so right. The when we serve, when a family gets services at one of our domestic violence shelters, we are keeping other parts of the government from having to spend funds to serve them. If someone goes into a DV shelter there and stays for a month, that's actually saving other government agencies money. And we need to do our part to make sure that message gets through. But I do think that's the key thing. It's providing this funding to our agencies and to our members is an investment. And one other thing I wanted to say about that is I do think our state legislators want. They like to think, well, the federal government should fund this, and I think we need to that our state legislators and our state government needs to fund these services too. Ohio, compared to other states, many other states does not fund victim services the way that it could.
That is so correct, Mary. We are not proportionate to the funding and the per capita that we actually have in the investments of local state funding for survivors of crime, victims of crime, right? And that is something that they need to actually understand and step up. Elise, what would you like legislators, whether it is a national representative or local, to understand in reference to the implication and their role?
Yeah, so I think a lot of you have kind of highlighted what I would like to say to legislators, that anyone can become the victim of a crime. It's not a special demographic. It could be anyone. And we have to ensure that when someone is the victim of a crime, that they are able to access services that are able to support them, empower them, restore their sense of safety, and really just uplift them. And nonprofits, for example, do provide these services at probably a much discounted rate to what the government in general could provide. But I will also say that many governmental agencies like prosecutor-based programs, that is a social service that they are providing, and it's an essential social service, and it is a legally required service that they're providing as well. I would like each local jurisdiction to also, if they have capacity, to step up and fund these essential services as well. There are some counties that have stepped up and been able to supplement victim services. But there are some that just haven't been able to or haven't prioritized victim services. So we would really like all governmental all jurisdictions to step up and fund these essential services.
Thank you, Elise. Kathy, what do you want them to know and to do?
Well, as everyone has said so eloquently, it's about prioritization, and it's over 35 years ago when we started establishing victims' rights laws, when we started providing support and services and assistance for crime victims. That was wonderful, but and the VOCA fund is great, right? We save the state a lot of money. It's coming from fines and penalties, not our tax dollars. But as we've seen, that's not a stable fund. It will never be a stable fund. And so for me as a survivor and someone who's been doing this work for all these years, I would expect my state, and Elise, as you said, county, state, and federal to really step up. Yes, it's great that VOCA's there's from fines and penalties, but I don't mind my tax dollars going to help crime victims. And I think we need to have a prior. I mean, when I look at all of the things that our tax dollars are going for, victims are not a priority, and it's time for victims to become a priority. I guess I can't say it any better than anyone else has. So
Appreciate that.
And with the Crime Victim Stabilization Fund, that's wonderful. That's been introduced. Again, it's another kind of fine and penalty scenario. Don't even know how much that's going to represent to help victims throughout the country. Clearly, I don't even know how much it is, but I hope they do it, and I hope they get it funded quickly and that passes. But again, let's find some real money. Let's truly make it a priority. Victims should not have to go without these services. And we have all of these children, all these individuals that go through these terrible crimes, and we don't get them the support, the services, the counseling, all that they need. But then yet we wonder, well, I'm not going to go on that line. I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, we could spend hours right on that, and what are holistic and wraparound services and approaches that actually are needed to stop crimes from reoccurring, right, and continue to be perpetrated if we're unable to do. And the reality is that we as Ohioans deserve the level of crime victim services that our government and communities rely upon, that we deserve fully funded victim services, fully staffed agencies, that we deserve staff that is capable of providing comprehensive advocacy services, that we deserve that our advocates are having sustainable wages, yes, to be able to actually do this heavy work, that our government and lawmakers must act to avoid losing half of the services currently providing to Ohio citizens, that we cannot go back to 20 years back, right, in reference to the level of services. So we would like them all to know that. So as we're closing up our time together, and once again, my gratitude to each and every one of you for allocating this time, for being in community with OESV, for elevating the needs of the community. We have a call to action, right, that we have put out. And since the call to action that we put out and our op-ed and the letters, we actually have 413 signatures, which is great, but we still need more, right? So we want all of those to sign on the letter so that we could send that to legislators, so that we can continue to advocate. So if people could actually check. I believe that in our chat, there is actually the live link that they could go on to, and that we are all part of the solution. But I want to ask, as we close, In what ways do you individually believe that we or envision that we can shape Ohio together to address these challenges? How do we shape Ohio together? What would be your vision as a collective and your final messages today?
I think for me, I personally envision an Ohio where no one is turned away from services because of funding or capacity issues, where everyone is able to access the financial, emotional, physical support and restoration that they need in order to, um, you know, be empowered and feel safe again in their lives. Um, yeah, that is really, I envision an Ohio where our legislators really understand that importance um, and prioritize victim services in Ohio.
Thank you, Elise. Danielle, what do you envision?
Yeah, I second that, Elise. That was very well said. And I would just say, I think part of what I envision is just this today too, right? All of us coming together and having the conversation as the collective where we're all serving similar communities. There's a lot of overlap sometimes in our neighborhoods and what we're seeing and what we're doing. And as we continue to grow stronger as a collective and communicate with each other and share resources, I think we're just making everyone stronger. So I really am so proud to have the Children's Advocacy Center as a member of this collective. And I know that it's made our services stronger and our network a lot stronger. And I think that we only continue to improve from here. So the conversation's the first step, and we're doing that. So thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Doug.
This is hard work. This is not an exact science. And when you have programs like all the ones that are represented here that have proven over time that it works, that it provides a valuable service to victims, a lack of money is not acceptable. We cannot accept that something that works, that is valuable to the people that we serve, is not going to be available. So we're just asking that you stand behind what you are allowed and positioned to do, and that is continue to serve the people that we all serve with successful programs.
Thank you, Doug. Mary.
I think my vision would be that we live in a state that invests in all citizens of Ohio, that invests in families that are haven't had the resources and haven't had the advantages that so many others of us have had. You know, our government is really interested in building our economy and building our manufacturing base. I wish that I guess I dream of a state where we cared about all people, and especially the families that are the most vulnerable and need the state support the most.
Thank you. And it's so crucial, right, in reference to the work that we do. And as Danielle actually indicated, right, coming together as a collective, that there is power and strength in our collaborative, that we continue to amplify the needs of all survivors or victims in whichever category, right, you actually define them. But the need for not only the community, but for our lawmakers to understand that this is a priority, that these are their constituents, that we are all here to actually eradicate violence, and that it has to be from a perspective of dietary and community-based level, that it takes the village and that the time is now. So as we continue to shape Ohio together, envisioning one that truly invest in its citizens, that truly understands the needs and the dynamics. We will continue to work in collaboration. Once again, I thank you each and everyone for being with us this afternoon, for joining in this conversation. We still have long ways, right, to actually be able to say we've won, but there are many different ways and people can actually go ahead and collaborate. One of those is go ahead, sign the letter, help us continue to go to amplify the needs, the voices, allow us to continue to educate, but also you could reach to any of the member-based agencies, to any of our coalitions, make donations as a community, speak to your local lawmakers in reference to the needs, and also be a part of the solution. None of us are perfect in this world of how do we actually help, but we all understand that we need each other and that the time is now. So once again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this conversation of Teal Talk, OESV, as well as just elevating the needs of survivors and the impact of VOCA cuts. Let's shape Ohio together, and that means you and I working in collaboration. Have a wonderful day, and let's continue the good fight.